See, what we have been trying to understand so far is that there is a behavioral difference in different societies, and this behavioral difference is studied for groups as anthropology. This is a subject of which has been integrated into sociology, but anthropology is in a way perverted by the West, by modern anthropology. Anthropology is a study of human behavior. The person who was instrumental in giving a shift to anthropology into the Western mode of studying the individuals and then constructing the society or constructing the group was one Professor Mine. Actually, he was in India. He was the one who brought about this distinction between status and contract, status based society and contract based society, and Maine wrote the Hindu law also. He was here, and based on that the entire Western anthropological model of the individual as the center, and the individual has to be contracted out of tradition and a new modern society has to be built. This is the Western modern anthropology, then which developed into methodological individualism, and then rational economic man, rational economic theory, efficient market theory, and then game theory, everything flowed out of this. But this has now been questioned heavily, because there is one Malinowski. I would like you to go through his studies. Malinowski said that this approach is not correct. He said, what is the core of a group thinking, whether it is a family or a community or a village? Say they will have some group norms, the do's and don'ts. So he said the idea of the traditional society is to prevent deviance. That is why do's and don'ts, a family has certain rules, a village has certain rules, the community has certain rules, that is to prevent a deviance, rather than punish the deviant. This was the basis of all traditional societies. But what happened? After the traditional societies were disturbed, these rules gave way. It happened in stages. First the traditional societies were taken over by the churches, which in the West laid down the rules, do's and don'ts, and then the church and the state clashed, and so rule of law became important. That is why the state people relationship changed to the social contract theory, and then people to people relationship changed because of contractual relationship. This is how in the West the society was deconstructed into individuals, and the entire economic base, mutual working model between the people became based on formal contracts, formal approaches, and today you have seen the effect of it in terms of divorces, in terms of destruction of families, state becoming the most important arbiter in every sphere. So this is one model, but the real anthropological model is that there is a trade off between the individual and the collective, whether it is the family or community, there is an adjustment. That individual freedom is there, it is up to this point. There is a beautiful sloka in Mahabharatam, Tyajat ekam kulasyarte ग्रामस्यार्थे कुलं त्यजेत्। ग्रामं जनपदस्य अर्थे आत्मार्थे पृथ्वीं त्यजेत्। This sums up the Indian anthropology. Tyajati ekam kulasyarthe means for the sake of the family, the individual interests are adjusted. That is tyajat means a sense of giving in, not that the individual is destroyed. Some people wrongly interpret it. For the sake of the family, the individual interests are compromised. Gramasyarthe kulam tejet. For the sake of the village, the family's interests are compromised. Gramam janapadasyarthe, the sense of nation. For the sake of the nation, a village's interests are compromised. But there is one thing, for the sake of reaching God, you can sacrifice everything. That is the idea. This is the final ancient Indian view. And why Atmarte Pradivim Tejet, that when you have God as the only purpose of your life, no other relationship matters. That is why all the saints and seers are supposed to be beyond rule of law. They are not bound by any rule of law, they are not bound by any nation, they become the property of the universe. So, ordinary people do not belong to this category. This explains the Indian anthropological principle that there is a trade-off between the individual and the immediate collective, and the immediate collective to the middle collective to the ultimate collective. That is what I mentioned as this expanding relationship. There is a relationship, but in the West there is discontinuity here. This is what I explained, and this has not only social implications, state society relationships are altered, everything is decided by law. And we have the Hindu law, it says that property is to be equally divided. In fact, I always used to tell my friends who are doing legal studies, you go and study the probate division cases. In most cases, people who are not traditionally entitled to the shares give affidavit that we do not want the share. Rule of law gives them the share, but the traditional law says no, whether it is the right behavior or wrong behavior is irrelevant. That people behave that way is important. So, this anthropological model of individualism, which became methodological individualism, and then out of it rational economic man, then rational market theory, then efficient market theory, then gaming, everything flowed out of this. The only thing is, this does not lend itself to that model. That is why there is a difference. Unless we understand that difference, we will not be, this does not mean that even in the West there is the same identical behavioral pattern applies to all nations. For example, take the experience of Yugoslavia in the year 1993. There is a paper which has been circulated, it is a draft paper which I have not been able to finalize, that is the socio-economic model functioning in India. This, I think this has been circulated to you, and I am reading, no, socio-economic model functioning in India. This is one of the first papers we circulated in 2000. No, this is a different paper. If it is not so, any of it is something which is available, I can just read it out. See, there was a, when socialism collapsed all over the world, socialist countries were affected. Yugoslavia had two problems, one economic problem and another political problem. There is a huge Christian Muslim battle, and you must have understood what kind of problems were there at the time. So the IMF and the World Bank told Yugoslavia that you have to follow this model, which heavily compromised Yugoslavia's political interest. Milosevic was the president who was even tried for war crimes and all that. But Milosevic approached one Dragoslav Avromic, was a 90-year-old economist. He was in Geneva. So Milosevic called him, and that the IMF and World Bank are putting, virtually imprisoning Yugoslavia, and they want us to accept their terms for restructuring, and that will heavily compromise us as a nation. What do we do? He said, I have a solution to suggest. What was the problem of Yugoslavia? Their foreign exchange was under pressure, and the running rate of inflation was 3 million percentage points, the highest ever recorded in the economic history of the world. Every minute the prices were changing. People had lost faith in the Yugoslavian dinar. The idea was how to restore that faith. I am talking within the same European paradigm, Western paradigm. One group of thinkers say, no, you have got to go borrow money from IMF and World Bank, strengthen your foreign exchange reserves. Dragoslav said, no, that will not work. I am going to suggest to you an alternative. The alternative is, Yugoslavia had at that time about $24 billion forex reserves in Deutschmark. He said, this is the asset centered on which we will do the reconstruction, not borrow more. The IMF and the World Bank said, yeah, come on, another $24 billion we will lend you. So the total will be $48 billion. I am just giving hypothetical numbers. So with this $48 billion, you can fight this huge problem, tsunami of inflation and the loss of faith you have. Dragoslav said, no, I will advise something different. You issue a dinar 2. The original dinar, which is subject to inflation, you will not touch. You will not proscribe. You will not invalidate and confiscate that currency. Let it be there. He said, make this currency convertible and offer 6% interest for those who invest in this currency and in the securities. Nobody approved this. The entire IMF, World Bank group of economists, all the neoclassical economists said this is completely wrong. How can you shift the psychology of the people by issuing a dinar 2? Dragoslav said, this is my advice. You take it or leave it. But I am sure once you back dinar 2 with these $24 billion reserves, the people will get confidence and they will begin investing in this. This was his advice. A different way of looking at the same problem. You know what happened? Milosevic took the advice because he was a nationalist. Yugoslavia was more important to him. So he accepted the advice. I will tell you what happened. Exactly what Dragoslav had said happened. Foreign exchange reserves rose by 60% in 45 days. Inflation came down to single digit. One second. In the first week. Five months production rose 100%. The whole world was watching. I am going to read out to you the report which International Commission on Peace and Food, which had a detailed study and the report of the Yugoslavian program, referred to this remarkable achievement as the alternative strategy in Yugoslavia and concluded, you need such vibrant thinkers. Possibly the greatest strength of the Yugoslav program is that it was a necessity conceived by the people within the country rather than by foreign experts, and depended entirely on domestic resources and capabilities for its accomplishment rather than on pleas for foreign assistance. Self-reliance released the creativity, generated determination, and mobilized all available resources to make the transition successful. The success of the super dinner, this was called super dinner. The success of the super dinner was structured by Dragoslav Avromic was so astounding that the Yugoslavian government named super dinner after Dragoslav, after his demise. Within a year or so he passed away. The Yugoslavian experience demonstrates that there is nothing like one model which will suit all. Russia accepted the same IMF World Bank prescription. Within 5 years it had to again go to IMF and World Bank. East Asian crisis, all countries accepted the IMF World Bank prescription, including Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Indonesia. Malaysia refused. Malaysia said we will follow the Indian model. Indian model was partial convertibility. They had gone into full convertibility. He said we will go for partial convertibility. You know, Malaysia was the soonest to recover, but that was completely against the IMF World Bank advice. So why I am mentioning all this is that our tendency to think in line with the IMF, World Bank, foreigners, Americans, fundamentally flawed because there is no inquiry. Without inquiry, I am saying after inquiry you accept it, I can understand. But because they say it, you accept it, it is wrong. That is the mindset we have, and unless you create a spirit of inquiry, this is not going to help. This is what Mahatma Gandhi did in 1931. In 1931 he told the British that we were more educated than, we were more literate than you were when you entered India, and you made us illiterate. The whole British Empire pounced on him. How could you say that? What is the evidence? He said, I don't have the evidence, but I feel I am true. Gandhiji had a way of replying. Afterwards in 1955, Dharampal, who believed that Gandhi could never be wrong, he went and spent almost a decade and came out with a study on many things in the archives of London and Berlin and all that. And I am going to read out to you how our perception that this was an illiterate country, uneducated country, was completely proved wrong by this research, and this research was provoked by Mahatma Gandhi's thinking differently. He said, no, we could never be there, we could never have been like that. Dharampal's study revealed that prior to 1770, by which time they had become actual rulers of large part of India, Bengal. The British, on whose writings and reports Dharampal's works were primarily based, had a different set of interests. These interests, as the subsequent period too, says Dharampal, were largely mercantile, technological, and were concerned with comprehending and evaluating the Indian statecraft and thereby extending their influence on the dominion of India. First, they did not come with a view to undermine you or say you are a backward society. They were actually studying the society, trying to sell their goods. Indian religions, philosophy, scholarship, and the extent of education scarcely interested them until then. Such a lack of interest, says Dharampal, was partly due to their different expectations from India. The main reason for, however, he adds, lay in the fact that the British society in this period, from the mid 16th to about the early part of the 18th century, had few such interests. They were not interested in education. In matters like religion, philosophy, learning and education, the British, according to Dharampal, were introverted by nature. It is not that the British had no tradition of education or scholarship or philosophy during the 17th, 18th or 19th centuries. This period they produced figures like Francis Bacon, Shakespeare, Milton, Newton, etc. They had universities at Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, which had their beginnings in the 13th and 14th centuries AD. By the later part of the 18th centuries, British had about 500 grammar schools, the entire country. But Dharampal says this considerable learning and scholarship was limited to the social elite. The most important part is, in Britain, education was not universal till very, very late. It was later than the universalization of education in India. That is what he was proving. While up to the early 17th century, the British were busy extending their bases, factories and fortifications and the like in India, Dharampal says European scholars on their part were trying to understand the various aspects of the civilization existing in this area. Accounts and discussions which happened to be of limited but great scholarly and religious interest were copied, according to Dharampal, many times over. It was this great accumulation of material from about the mid 18th century, finds Dharampal, led to serious scholarly attention and debate on India, particularly with reference to its politics, laws, philosophy, science and especially Indian astronomy. This is what is now known as Indology. Instructions and indigenous instructions for collection of information about the extent and nature of indigenous education were issued by the British at that time. Till mid 18th century, they were not concerned with the state of affairs in India. Only then they issued instruction, find out what is the educational system in India. Surveys were conducted to know the position, but the quality of the coverage of the surveys, was Dharampal, varied from presidency to presidency and even from district to district. Information available today collected from these studies largely belongs to 1820s and 1930s period. The principal survey conducted by William Adams, whose findings were contained in his report on the state of education in Bengal. In addition, there were observations by Thomas Munro on the state of education in Madras presidency, by Dr. G.L. Pendergast about the education system around 1820 in the newly formed Bombay presidency, and by Dr. G.W. Leitner in 1882 on the spread of education in Punjab in 1850 or thereabouts. The entire India is covered, east, south, west, north. There were also district-wise surveys in Madras presidency about the state of education in 1822-23, to which Dharampal had access. William Adams submitted 3 reports in 1935, 36 and 38. These became famous as Adams reports. Adams reported that in Bihar and Bengal there were over 100,000 village schools. Despite the controversy the report generated, the total impression produced by them is one of extensive decay of these institutions. How it decayed we will tell you, but there were 100,000 village schools functioning, and how it decayed later. This was not the case with Bengal alone. In Madras presidency, Thomas Munro had asserted, much before Adams submitted the report, that every village had a school in this presidency. The study and observations about Madras presidency or Bengal presidency were not just anecdotal, because they had an extensive study. Not anecdotal, but similar was the situation in Bombay presidency. Dr. Pendergast wrote an identical report that the entire Bombay presidency, there was hardly a village, great or small, throughout our territories in which there is not a school, or in larger villages had many more. There appeared to be no difference in the situation in Punjab. The observation made by Leitner in 1882 show that the spread of education in Punjab around 1850 was to similar extent. So it was not just coincident that the north, east, west and south, 4 different observers of the British establishment themselves recorded the then prevailing state of education system in India. And then he goes into the British education system in the corresponding period. It is not simply that India had a flourishing educational system, and I will tell you what is the extent of literacy at that time recorded by, before I go into the British I will tell you. The British records unearthed by Dharampal and interpreted by him showed that in 1822-25, in Tamil Nadu Sautarkar district, the number of Brahmins in school was just 13% and the other caste 84%. It was pre-British schools. In Madras city, Brahmins 23, others 69. In Tirunelveli, the other caste 70. In Salem, the other caste 70. In Tanjore, the other caste 75. In Chengalpet, the other caste 78. Madurai 74. Coimbatore 81. In Malabar 54. Muslims 27, totaling 81. In Karnataka, Berlari 63. Srirangapatnam 74. Muslims 14, totaling 88. In Andhra, Vizag 54%. Rajmandri 65%, Machilipatnam 67%, Guntur 59%, Nellore 67%, and Kadapa 76%, Orissa Ganjam district 81%. This he proved that the other castes lost their education during the British period. Stunned the world, except India, because nobody studied in India. I do not think this has been prescribed as a study text for any school or college. I will tell you now what is the state of education in Britain at that time. As Dharampal asserted with authority, our education system was not inferior to the state of British education. What was the state of education in England? Dharampal considered this exercise necessary as this deals with the other part of first of all, they had only Sunday schools. They shifted from Sunday schools to day schools when, but this change took place, one will not believe, only in the 19th century. Till then they had only Sunday schools. They had Oxford University, Cambridge University for the Lord's children. But this change took place in the 19th century, and even at as late as 1834, the curriculum in the better part of schools in London was limited to the religious instruction, reading and writing arithmetic, and some schools said they would not teach writing for fear of evil consequences. The idea is people should not be allowed to write because they will write everything that they want to write later. As statistics of schools state, in the year 1792, there were 3,363 schools in England with 46,000 students only throughout England. When we had 100,000 schools in each part of India at that time. Each school with 20, 30, 40, 50 students. In 1818, the attendance was, you see, in 1792, 46,000. In 1818, 6,74,000. In 1851, 2144. They ramp up education. So in a period of 60 years, the attendance jumped from 40,000 to 21 lakhs. What was the reason for the quantum jump? Dharampal says that the jump was because Joseph Lancaster's system of monitorial method of teaching and also by Andrew Rubel supposedly borrowed from India. They studied the Indian system and borrowed. You know why? In India, many people fail to understand that education system was divided into two categories, Paravidya and Aparavidya. Paravidya means what? The otherworldly pursuits were handed over to the Brahmins. The entire worldly pursuit, secular education was given to the other castes. The other castes were denied this education later, and the Brahmins took over the Aparavidya in 200 years. They became engineers, they became chartered accountants, they became everything. Upper caste took over the secular education system during the British period. That is how there was a general decline in mass education in this country. This is Dharampal's conclusion. But this is not how we understand or perceive India. I think unless we go back to history and understand the truth about history, just as we studied Angus Madison and Paul Byrock, just as we studied several supporting documents like the Bank of International Settlement report, Marco Polo's travelogue, the Greco-Roman records, the American researches about the Gupta period export-led model of development, which shows a completely different economic performance history in India. Educational history is also there. You cannot perform economically well unless you have an education base, and this education base is not possible without a philosophic base. See the philosophic base here. How in page 141 of this book, Dr. Kanasabhabati, he was one of the persons with whom we travelled across the country, studied the people, studied the society, studied business, savings habits of people, the relationship between caste and entrepreneurship, family's role in development, women's role in development, all this we studied. At page 141, he sets out the Arthashastra principles. What kind of economic principles we had? Arthashastra mentioned the following principles for trading. Both locally produced and imported goods shall be sold for the benefit of the public. When there is an excess supply of a commodity, a buffer stock shall be built by paying a price higher than the prevailing market price. When the market price reaches the support level, the buying price shall be changed according to the situation. See how meticulously principles have been laid down. When there is a glut in the commodity, its sale shall be canalized through state controlled outlets, and the merchant shall sell only from accumulated stock unless it is exhausted on a daily wage basis with no profit margin. Surplus stocks unaccounted for in the hands of the merchants shall be sold for the benefit of the public. Even a large profit shall be foregone if it is likely to cause harm to the public. No artificial scarcity shall be created by the accumulation of commodities constantly in demand. These shall be made available at all times and shall not be subjected to restrictions when they may be sold. What I am saying is these economic principles were also evolved. Education, economic principles and models, economic performance. That is what made India a performer till about 1750, till almost 1850 we were amongst the leading nations with more than 14% of world's GDP. So only because of that performance, if India is re-performing again, it is not a rags to riches story. It is because we are rediscovering our talents. You know, the Silk Route and the trading channels from Turkey to Calcutta, they developed a language of their own called Kharosthi. Numbers were imported into Arabia from India, the use of numbers. Calculations were not there without the Indian contribution. Of course, the famous zero. So, It is not that when we are talking about an Indian economic model, it is something new. It is, there is an Indian economic, socio-economic DNA, and that is what we are trying to rediscover. And we feel when there is a different approach to your savings, your investment, or your entrepreneurship, the way you trade. For instance, one of the things which foreign fund managers come and consult me, they said, sir, there is a difference between what is happening in India and what is happening outside. In India, small units prefer to remain small units. They do not want to grow. They are satisfied with the return that they have. Precisely what China says. When the whole family works, they said, well, we do not want to work for more than 4 hours. That is sufficient for us. That is why the concept of drudgery, which drove the entire Marxian thinking, was avoided in India. Because you limited your ambition. Even today, millions and millions of small units prefer to remain small units. So when Mr. John Meketa met me from the Meketa group, he did not even tell me who he was. When he came and met me, he said, sir, I am managing $800 billion. I was shocked. He came with his wife and the India equity managing director of Credit Suisse, and he told me something which was very much in tune. Of course, he must have read my writing, that is why he came. He said, I also study the history of the country, the society before I invest. I do not just go by these market reports and equity analysis. So, I also go precisely because I am investing in the people. And his view was that economic development is shifting to Asia because the people are in Asia. But you think about 50 years back, 40 years back, people were considered to be the burden of India. The ordinary people were considered to be the burden of India. Now we have demographic economics. See how the paradigm shifts, how the change occurs. What is the problem of Japan? Aging. New children are not produced. What is the problem of China going to be in 2060-70? They have prevented the birth of new children 50 years back. What will be the problem of India 100 years later? The same problem with China will be facing 50 years from now. These are all consequences which are product of your actions, and no economic theory, no macro microeconomic theory can correct it. So what is advantageous today will prove to be disadvantageous tomorrow. This is the entire concept which we have to understand. What worked to the advantage of America 10 years back is working to its disadvantage today. And now when we are importing those very thoughts, can we risk this country for a 10-year advantage? So these are all issues on which we will have to now. One more thing, I am through with this. This thinking is coming in European Union. The European Union on 26th February 2007, the European Commission consultation paper from the Bureau of European Policy Advisors titled An Agenda for European Citizens and a Social Reality Check. They circulated a paper as to what is happening to that society. A seed of rethinking. Where are we going? After having gone, but we are better, we have not gone into it. They have gone into this mess, and what they are thinking, I will just try and read out some of the extracts. Trends how the European societies have changed. As traditional societies erode and our societies become more diverse, feelings of insecurity grow, fear of crime increases, questions of identity and citizenship come in question. The changed attitudes to authority, family, and what ordinary people seek out of life Life is no longer something to be accepted and lived as part of collectivity into which one happened to be born, worker, peasant, village, town, church or religious sect. More people now see their lives in terms of personal biography they write for themselves. This is not to say that the people are no longer concerned about social cohesion. On the contrary, surveys suggest that many are, but many have no desire to return to the old conformities of families, class or religion. Because once you are out of it, it is not very easy to come into it. Europe, especially the north, not only the northern Europe, is a lot less religious than United States. Only 30% of Europeans attend church regularly. 40% attend solely on special occasions. Yet 3/4 still find a religious service appropriate at birth and death. Divorce rates has virtually doubled in a single generation. Member states with the lowest divorce rate in 2003 in rank were Ireland, Italy, Greece, Spain, Poland, Slovenia. Member states with the highest were Czech Republic, Lithuania, Estonia, Belgium, Denmark and the UK. Couple living together are increasingly prepared to have children without getting married first. Over a quarter of the children are born or outside the marriage. This is 2007. This is going to be almost half now in 7 years. In England it is going to surpass 51% by 2016. Sweden has 40% plus, Denmark, France, England and UK, but less than 1 in 10 in Italy. However, the proposed Italian births outside the marriage doubled since 1960. The hold of extended family appears to have weakened across the Europe. Only half of the children continue to live with their parents up to the age of 25 and only a fifth up to the age of 30 across European 25. 1 in 8 adults live on their own, even in the prime of life, up by half in 2 decades. Only a quarter of the grandparents care for grandchildren on a regular basis, and half had not cared for them on a single occasion in a 12-month period. Individuals define themselves more by choices they make over consumption than their role as producers. Consumption is so important to people that they are produced to incur large consumer debts in order to sustain it. As a percentage of the household disposable income, consumer debt stands over 90%. This is the output. They will study it independently. But once you make an individual of choice and he has no choiceless relationship, once his relationship is choice, then he becomes the choice of himself, and so the debt. There is evidence that most of us find hedonic treadmill ultimately unsatisfying. This hedonic treadmill ultimately unsatisfying for those who cannot keep up consumption rates. It suggests source of stress, accentuating problems of self-esteem and feelings. If you don't wear a branded shirt, you feel shy to go out, because it becomes a matter of self-esteem. You don't have the same shirt as your neighbor wears. So binge drinking, obesity, mental illness. Majority of women in the working group, 55.7, have no paid job, which is true of all member states except Italy, Poland, Spain and Malta. Denmark and Sweden employment rate of women is over 70%. Across whole of Europe, the gender employment gap continues to narrow and it is around 15%. Declining fertility have been pretty universal throughout European Union. In 2003, EU 25 fertility rate was an average of 1.48, below the 2.1 necessary to sustain the human population. Because of that, they have to import people from outside or outsource the jobs. If they outsource the job, there is clash between America and Europe, because Europe becomes more competitive. So America says don't outsource the jobs. If you don't outsource the jobs, you have to permit immigration. If you permit immigration, people will come from Arabia. What will happen? Don't think a cultural problem is limited to culture. It gets into sociology, it gets into economics, it gets into macroeconomics. So it goes on. Finally, it says in 1940, 40% of the EU population was under 25. By 2000, it had fallen down to 30%, and by 2025, it will be less than a quarter. That means young population keep on reducing, elder population increasing, and so finally it says only 68% profess themselves satisfied. Significantly, that figure drops to a low of 17% among those who express themselves dissatisfied with their lives. So this is the model. An agenda for European citizens, a social reality check. European Commission consultation paper dated 26/2/2007. So this is the model which has worked in the West, and it is fatiguing, and we are now following the West. Where should we follow the West? Where we should not follow the West, on which there is no discourse. The West says something, it is incorporated here. Of course, after 2008, there is a break in the thinking, but still there is no vibrant, aggressive, robust, indigenous intellectual thinking. That is where it is very important. What is, you see the empowerment of women in the West, but what is their status? Respect for women versus empowerment of women is an idea on which India can have a discourse at the global level. Respect for elders, respect for teachers, respect for parents, respect for women. All this builds social order, but definitely against equality. Certainly father and son are not equal. A mother and son are not equal. You know, if I close my eyes and look, the person who has contributed the greatest to me in my life, it's my mother. And after I lost her at the age of 97, 3 years back, I remember her even more, I recall her even more. This enquiry is not there. You think you are writing your own biography. As they say, everybody writes his or her own biography. This is completely contrary to the Indian idea of anthropology. What the Indian idea of anthropology has yielded, now I am going to tell you, it is contained in this book. This is the prescribed book. I have travelled outside the book because this book is with you. You can read this book. But whatever I have tried to tell you so far has been outside the book, culled out from different sources, and I have tried to make a cogent theme and model out of it for you to understand that we have an Indian model functioning, working, efficient in India, in that all that we have been trying to say as taken for granted as backward. Family is taken for granted. Community, culture, we enjoy the umbrella of protection from all this, but we do not think we have to contribute to sustain it. We are consumers of this. The question is, are we contributors? This is the question that the European Commission paper says. Everybody wants to be a consumer of this system. You are a consumer of the family, consumer of the community, consumer of the culture, but are we contributing to its sustenance? In one sense, in one word, it is said in our thing, dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. Dharma is a concept. Dharma will protect you only if you sustain dharma. Otherwise, you will exhaust these resources. These resources, these are civilizational resources. The West has exhausted its civilizational resources because they were only consumers of it and they did not contribute to it. You have to sustain it, you have to nourish it, you have to fertilize it, you have to water it, you have to celebrate it, because these are concepts. Unless you celebrate them, unless you renew them, it is not that they will always be valid. You have got to renew them, you have got to discard certain aspects, but there is a continuity. So, this family, community, culture, these are all sustaining and functioning mechanism. It has been related here. That is what I am going to. There are three principles which are very relevant. All collectives have promoted economic development in India, and all collectives have been sustained. And this is our study, which we started when I went to Ludhiana, and I saw a huge industrial development there. I was surprised. Everywhere people employed, of course a messy infrastructure. Then I sat with people in the night, late in the night, after 2 days of travel. I only saw prosperity, 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 nothing else. Then I sat in a dinner, there are about 60, 70 people. One air vice marshal had come, and I was talking to them as to how this engineering development took place. How did the machine tool factories come into being? How did the hosiery development came into being? How Ludhiana became the exporter of cycle parts for all the multinationals manufacturing cycle in the world? How did this happen here? Any normal human being with an inquiring mind will ask this question, but I do not think any IIT asked this question. I do not think any management institute asked this question. I do not think any government research institution asked this question. So they said the entire development is because of one Ram Gadia community. This is a community of artisans. And then I studied that community. You know, the Ramgadiyas are not allowed into any West German manufacturing companies, because the moment they see a thing they produce it, and so they have banned the entry of these Ramgadiyas in German factories. If they see a thing, they will manufacture. I will give you an example. This air vice marshal, he told me that they had a problem in before 1965 war, and the anti-aircraft gun has a vacuum pusher, and that vacuum pusher has to be imported from Russia. And the finance ministry always said, we do not have foreign exchange to give. In those days foreign exchange was restriction, even cricket matches were stopped because we could not pay the foreign exchange for foreign travel, foreign cricketers. So they said, no, we will not give foreign exchange. There are about 500 anti-aircraft guns, everything lying idle, because this particular, the heart of the thing is not working. So this air marshal said, he was in charge of maintenance at that time, a young officer. These Ramgadiyas will always be hanging around these places doing maintenance job, odd jobs, and so he called one of the Ramgadiya, I call them traditional engineers, like the German engineers. The German 372 craft trained engineers are much more efficient, much more competent, much more innovative than maybe the best engineering graduates in the world. That is why they are up in the upper end of the technology. So this Ramgadiya, he called him and said, will you be able to manufacture this? He said, sir, I want to take it to my home for 45 days, you must give me. No, no, we can't give, it is national secret. This non-functioning mechanism is national secret. So he said, anyhow my job will go if I give it, but I can allow you to work inside. And so he gave him a temporary job and made him work inside, and the man worked for 60 days and produced a prototype. And at that time the import cost of which was some 40,000 or something per unit, and so he gave him a prototype which perfectly worked. Then he asked him, I want 500. He said, sir, if you want 500, I will need 100 days because I can manufacture not more than 5 per day. He supplied the entire 500 and his charge was 2000 per part, and the 1965 war was won because of that. That is what the Air Vice Marshal told me. Why I am saying is the person's inherent capacity, engineering skills. That is what made Hero cycles the #1 cycle in India, in the world, and we are supplying manufacturing spare parts. So every place where I went, Jalandhar, all of us are interested in cricket, where is the cricket bats manufactured in the world? It is in Jalandhar. Whether it is English Cricket Control Board or West Indies or South Africa or Australia, they place their order on the Jalandhar carpenters. So when I went to a factory, one carpenter was very intensely working. The proprietor told me, you see the carpenter and see the Maruti car parked outside, it belongs to him. He can manufacture 25 willows a day. If he has a good mood, he can manufacture even 50. My ideas changed when I placed after place after place. Nothing to do with universities, nothing to do with education. And then I began studying from the anecdote to the model. You see, if it is one area of study or one particular community or one particular incident, it is anecdote. But if you study 4 parts of India and say in all parts of India there is education, it is not anecdotal, it is the model. Like that, when we traveled across the country, there are 2800 artisan clusters in India according to UNIDO. And there are 128 manufacturing clusters, and out of them, except a few, all other clusters have been developed by communities like Tirupur, Namakkal. I was thinking, being in Tamil Nadu, I was thinking Namakkal was famous only for Namakkal Hanuman. But I went to Namakkal, I found Namakkal was a place where at that time, 1999, 2000, there were 30,000 lorries owned by some 3,000 lorry owners. 30,000 lorries in Namakkal, which is a town of about 4-5 lakh population at that time. Then I met with the Namakkal Lorry Owners Association president, and he was owning 300 lorries, and he told me that he was a cleaner, then he became a driver, then he became a owner, and now 300 lorries, and he was the owner of Lorry Owners Association. And he told me, out of the 3,000 lorry owners, 2,990 will be of my category, sir. Entrepreneurship comes by infection. It is within the community. He has bought a lorry. If I don't buy a lorry, my respect in the community will go. One cleaner has bought a lorry, another cleaner must, otherwise he has no social status. Social pressure produces entrepreneurship. These are all how I began making study. Now it is all more widely done. For example, Fraternal Capital by Chari is a study on Tirupur, in which he had brought out the social complexities and how the community mechanism of circulating capital, community mechanism of cooperating with one another, community mechanism of competing with one another has produced a geometric effect in carrying entrepreneurship throughout. So we have 300 large exporters, 67% less than 10th standard, only 9% graduates. So I found in my entire study, all employers are uneducated, all employees are educated. because they employ chartered accountant. My chartered accountant, there are 100 chartered accountants working in Tirupur. Who are their employers? These are their employers. The moment you are educated, your risk bearing tendency goes. You do not produce entrepreneurs, you produce executives. They need entrepreneurs. Who produces entrepreneurs? The society produces entrepreneurs. I will give you one of the finest learning parts of my life was in the year 2005. I addressed a Rotaract meeting in Kodaikanal. In that meeting, about 150 youths had come from different parts of Tamil Nadu and some had come from Andhra and Kerala also. So I generally, when I address meetings, I used to ask the youths, what are you going to do in life? And it was a half a day session, so I could spend more time with them. And each one of them stood up and said, I want to be a teacher, I want to be this. And I found out of 150, almost 50-55 people said, we want to set up business. I was shocked because this kind of ratio I have not seen in IIM or IIT. Then I asked these 50-60 people to stand up and ask them, where are you coming from? They are coming from Tirupur, they are coming from Namakkal, they are coming from Shivakashi, they are coming from Palladam. These are all places of business. The society has a culture of entrepreneurship. And all this we were studying in 94, 95, 96, 97, 98. In the year 2003, India enters the Global Entrepreneur Monitor study. And the conclusion is, in the age group of 16 to 64, 18% are entrepreneurs in India and the figure is far low, 11% in China, 10% in US. That is how India came to be branded as an entrepreneurial model. Whereas the entrepreneurs in US are supported by a vast network of funding, venture funding, angel funding, but here there is nothing. According to the 2005 economic survey, $43.2 million non-farming enterprises about which I told you, only 5% had organized finance. The balance came from families, communities, friends, credit rotation within. This is not recognized financial model, and this is proved by what is the credit GDP ratio in India as compared to other countries. In page 140, there is a tabulation given which shows that in China, the credit to GDP ratio, bank credit to GDP ratio was 60% in 81. It went up to, it has gone up to 139% in 2006. In US, in 1917, it was 118%, now it is 216%. The world average is 88 to 163. 163% of the GDP is the bank advances to business. In India, it is just 33.5%. That shows the huge role of the society in funding business. I will give you an example of Karur, which we made a study through the PSG Institute of Financial Management. Karur has produced two scheduled banks, Lakshmi Vilas Bank and Karur Vaisya Bank. How a small town of 7.5 lakh people could produce two large banks, that itself should be a matter of study. And then we found there are 30,000 private money lenders, 3,000 of them large, 300 of them larger, This is how it is. And there are, apart from these two banks, there are 54 branches of nationalized banks. The PSG Institute of Management studied, out of 3,600 crore of total money lent to the export business there, only 1,200 crore came from this source, balance 2,400 crore came from these people. You can understand why the banks, with two large banks functioning there, 54 branches of nationalized banks, in an export business which is more organized than any other business, only 1/3 came from them. You know why? The appraisal formula. And this fellow, you go there, he will say so much money is needed. Let us assume somebody comes to me, I am one of the financiers, and I have 5 lakhs and the man wants 20 lakhs. I will phone others and say we have to give 20 lakhs to him. The persons to whom I phone, I become responsible. And this man's credit worthiness is known to me, and there cannot be better appraisal than the fact whether the man is honest or not. The entire idea of credit risk management is to find out whether the fellow will repay. In an impersonal mechanism, you address you have all kinds of norms, but it is personalized. One man defaults, he can never get loan from anyone in that area. Credit appraisal mechanism. So what the banks do, these fellows borrow money from the bank and advance money to them, and the banks are very happy to advance money through the local money lenders. This is the social capital mechanism at work. This book is entirely of this. I will only read out a few parts of it for you to understand how the Indian economic model is different. Take Sankagiri at page 183 and 186. It's a very interesting example. Sankagiri is a transport cluster where these Taurus vehicles, huge vehicles, they are owned by Sankagiri people. Second largest lorry traffic in the country, Sankagiri, almost a village. 60% of the truck owners entered the transport business as drivers, 80%, 90% of the truck owners entered the business as drivers or cleaners. The background of the transport owners in Sankagiri is striking. 90% of them come from agricultural dependent families. Of these, 20% of them were earlier engaged in cattle breeding. They were grazing cattle. How did they become entrepreneurs? Throughout India, there are, as I said, 2,800 artisan clusters and 128 large industrial clusters, which produces 60% of India's manufacturing and as much of our exports. They have grown only like this, whether it is Tirupur or Namakkal or Karur or Ramanagara, Morbi. So I found that the drive of India is not methodological individualism. The drive of India is collectivism, sharing, community, family bondage, circulating capital within. I will just tell you what the World Bank says about Tirupur. About the credit rotation in Tirupur. In Tirupur knitwear industry, 92% of the entrepreneurs are from agricultural background. Among Karur, 73% of the exporters are found directly linked to agricultural families. Chari notes that the Tirupur exporters from the Gounder community, who were earlier workers, level of education of 25% of them is primary or less, while 66% of them have secondary education or even less. Among the domestic players belonging to the Gounder ex-worker factory, 42% of them are educated to middle class level or even less. 76% of them are secondary education or less. Of those who won the awards of National Innovation Foundation set up by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India 2003, 30% were not even fully literate. I will just read out the World Bank thing which should. This UNIDO study. UNIDO survey shows out of 138 industrial clusters in India, only 13 of the clusters were induced by the government policy, while the remaining 125 grew spontaneously at the initiative of the entrepreneurs themselves. As I told you, between Tirupur and Perundurai is a huge industrial cluster developed by the Tamil Nadu government at an investment of almost 1000 crores. For 20 years it remained virtually unoccupied. But Tirupur was developing 25 kilometers away, because people wanted a factory which they could manage 24/7. I'll just 227. The World Bank had acknowledged that the community based relationship helped business to become competitive in international markets. World Development Report 2001 reveals as to how the majority community of Tirupur was able to succeed in the knitted garment industry due to the transfer of capital through community networks. This is social capital. The report states since 1985, Tirupur had become a hotbed of economic activity in the production of knitted garments. By 1990, the high growth rate of exports, Tirupur was a world leader with the high growth rate of exports. Tirupur was a world leader in knitted garment industry. The success of this industry is striking. This is particularly so as the production of knitwear garments is capital intensive, and the state banking monopoly had been ineffective at targeting capital funds to efficient entrepreneurs, especially at the levels necessary to sustain Tirupur's high growth rate. What is behind the story of the development? This is the question that World Bank raises. Why I am saying it is not because of World Bank that they decided to study this. Nobody decided to study this. They found one small village in India is having a huge share in knitwear exports. How it happened? And there is no, according to them, there is no international airport, there is no linkages, other infrastructure linkages, so they wanted to study. The needed capital was raised within the Gounder community, a caste relegated to land based activities relying on community and family network. Those with capital in the Gounder community transfer it to others in the community through long established informal credit institutions and rotating savings and credit associations. These networks were viewed as more reliable in transmitting information and enforcing contracts than the banking and legal system that offered weak protection of creditors' rights. The intense competition in the garment industry ensured that good money will not follow bad and that the firms would pay attention to the needs of the customers. This is more or less the case everywhere, and this is the largest part of the Indian economy apart from agriculture, whether it is trade or construction or manufacturing outside the corporate sector. Corporate sector accounts for 14% of India's GDP, I already told you. 40% contribution comes from this sector, and it is the fastest growing sector. Vaidyanathan's books will give you complete statistics. He has specialized in studying the non-corporate sector, one of the most brilliant minds in this country. So we find the model that is operating is anything but individualistic, but we think individualistic. As some student asked yesterday, what will happen if I cannot have celebrate Valentine's Day with my girlfriend? Nothing wrong about it, but why don't you align it with your family? Why don't you take permission from your parents? I am going for. This is the trade off that is needed. You break it, then 41% is the childbirth outside marriage. That also you have to understand. Because if you do not know where to draw the line, this is what happens. The drawing the line is, if you are not able to do it, the family does it, the community does it, the society does it. You see, only a mature mind can understand this. So, if you look at the totality, I am not going into each of these things except that one diamond merchant only I would like to read out, because that is a very pithy and very demonstrative how the diamond merchants, India became a diamond power. You know, we control 2/3 of the diamond trade in the world today, which was the monopoly of the Jews 30 years back. How they shifted, no government policy, the policies were made by people. And how Surat developed as the diamond cutting center, the entire Saurashtra became the diamond cutting center of the world. 9 out of 10 diamonds cut in the world are cut in Saurashtra. And for 30 years, for lack of water, before these Narmada and check dam facilities which were created, which made the villages have water, all of them used to come to Surat, dirty the city and make it a huge municipal problem. It was a law and order problem. The government could not handle it. But the people who came there, they were not a waste. They learnt diamond cutting. In 30 years, this technology spread not through market, not through contract, not through IPR registrations. It sailed through social capital. And see what happens now. Though it may be surprising, many of the people from ordinary background dominate the international trade, and some of them create employment opportunities for foreigners in their lands. You know, in Amsterdam we have created, our diamond merchants have gone and created employment opportunities for the people there. The following lines explain the role of Gujaratis from ordinary backgrounds doing successful business in foreign countries. For Indian diamond merchants, many of them are descendants of farmers from Palanpur and Kathiawar in Gujarat. You can see all this in Wikipedia, very detailed account is available. The diamond paved city of Antwerp is the second home to them, as is the bustling diamond district of New York, Hong Kong, China, Vietnam, Russia, Sri Lanka and Canada are all extensions. Sri Lanka are extensions of their factories and workplaces, and their glittering crafts are found in retail emporia around the world. In order to support this industry, Palanpuris and fellow Patel community had to ensure a constant flow of rough diamonds. They chose to migrate to Antwerp as it was the world capital for the rough trade. In the last 4 decades, slowly and gradually, they have grown in a group of nearly 300 families who form one of the highly respected immigrants to reside in Belgium. They are the most affluent society. Most of them are self-employed and have in recent years created local employment by employing secretaries, accountants of sorts. You know what is their education? 5th standard, 4th standard. A study conducted among 35 diamond exporters from Surat revealed that only 2 of them had completed more than secondary education. It also showed 40% of them have less than 5th standard education. 20% of them are illiterate. These are the people who have gone and conquered Belgium and Antwerp. You know, diamond trade is a 60,000 crore trade today. and we control 2/3 of it. And how they formulated policies, they made the government to formulate policy. You know, this advance licensing procedure was suggested by these diamond merchants. Sir, we are exporting for which we want rough diamonds, and you want us to pay for this, you want us to pay for import license, import duty and all that. Sir, why don't you give us advance license? So once we import, we export, so account is clear, there is no financial transaction involved. That the Palanpuri suggested it to Morarji Desai, who was the finance minister at that time, and the policy was formulated. It was not by an IAS officer or an economic thinker, but the man who was actually feeling the necessity for it. All this requires study. Without study, we are adopting the Western thinking, model, theories, behavior. But here there is something which is working on the ground and which is producing numbers. There are 12 million retail outlets in India. There are instances which will show how, for example, one community has opened a shop. There is necessity to open another shop. The fellow who has, he will ask his worker in that shop, I will give you credit, you open the shop in this locality. This is how the entire Nadar community spread and occupied 75% of the retail space in Tamil Nadu. Every business that has grown, whether it is construction industry or hotel industry is very largely in South India, are people from Mangalore. You know it. Everywhere you go, the Mangaloreans run hotels, and they were all bearers and servants in hotels earlier. It is not that those who were qualified in catering technology, they establish hotels. Of course, they are employed in those hotels. So you must understand, this entrepreneurial quality is a quality of the society. It needs support, it needs nourishment, it needs credit rotation, it needs non-contractual reciprocal obligations. This is called the social capital, about which there is a huge study going on, starting with Putnam. It has been recognized by Francis Fukuyama and others, but this cannot happen in an atomized individualistic society. So we have a different business model, different entrepreneurial model, but we do not look at it that way. We look at an entrepreneur as somehow, you know, for instance, you take the leather work, which is supposed to be an outcast work. An outcast was doing it in Agra and Kanpur, but they saw in it a huge opportunity. The very business for which they were outcasted, they began doing it. They are the richest people there. Slight reorientation. This requires original thinking. This requires reassessment. This requires introspection. So why I am coming and bothering yourself and in a way myself is to infect this thought that you must take up study of this work. There are several, Solapur, how many people have studied Solapur? How many people have studied Kolhapur? These are all clusters which have been evolved by the communities. Nobody has studied them. So I think a study will reveal to us the truth which has been hidden from us, from educational institutions, from academic institutions, from research institutions, and I think we should be able to generate 5, 10 bright minds from the IIT who will do this, because we have all done this from outside the curriculum. It has to go get into the main curriculum. That is the idea of this course. I am extremely happy that with this I will be completing the academic presentation, and Mr. Bapat suggested that the next session should be an open session. That session will be titled the need for fresh thinking in Indian economy and finance. The sum total of whatever I spoke, I will speak, maybe more people will attend, and afterwards the last session will be to share personal experience. I will share my personal experiences in life, you can share your personal experiences. Let that be just an informal session, the last session. The next session will be an open session. If you have any questions in the next 5-10 minutes, I will.
Kolhapur, I'm interested to study Kolhapur. So, what is it about Kolhapur that maybe a hint or two?
I asked what is there other than Hanumanji in Namakkal. Why a particular industry develops in one place itself requires a study. You can establish a cement factory in a place because land is available, one person is promoter and one banker comes in, it is okay. But how is it that 500 small industries develop in the same business in one place? So Tirupur people, when I went to them for the first time, they were explaining all their problem. I said, you must understand one thing, that 300 of you function in one place is your biggest strength. Let us assume that you are in 100 different places in Tamil Nadu, you will have no strength. So the clusterization, you see, this is the idea we sold to the NDA government after our study, and then they formulated the cluster policy, because the clusters did not have infrastructure, water supply, drainage, nothing. So they followed the cluster policy, and for each cluster the government began giving grants. That is how Tirupur got a grant of about 100 crores or something like that. But the knowledge that there are clusters itself is only in the last 10-15 years it has become a matter of understanding.
So we discussed about small scale industry, like about its growth. So sir, in like there are a few atheists which we have a discussion with. So what happens is that these small scale industries, for example food vendors and all, they earn a lot in a day, but there is a certain point after which they cannot grow, but they earn so much that it is not possible for them to grow. But then these thinkers who tell us that they should look up to becoming a millionaire, they should go up, they should have their own chains and franchisees and all. So for like as we said that there is actually no need because it is sufficient for them, but then how do we give the reply to these atheist thinkers who think in a such a
allow them to exist, that is all. So because we have allowed all kinds of thinkers to exist. For example, if I were only looking at money, why should I be coming and teaching you? You know, my time in terms of money is very costly. Why should I? There is a trans-economic dimension in every human being. We were the only people to have discovered it and sustained it. The West did not lost sight of it, it is in trouble. So if they say, okay, if people want to grow, you see everybody has freedom, you know, somebody has freedom to grow, somebody has freedom not to grow, somebody has the freedom to close down the business and go to and join some ashram. You must allow everything, you know. In India, people do not want to grow beyond their localities, they are very happy with the atmosphere there, people do not want to move from one place to the other, it is very good. So it is a virtue.
Sir, you spoke about this role of private money lenders, especially in Karur, and it is significant in other areas also. But all the time we see government policy is totally against them. Recently Maharashtra passed a law making it illegal. So do you suggest that this should be supported and government should not treat it as illegal or a very bad activity?
You see, in everything there are usurious money lenders are there. It is not that they are not, but there are two kinds of money lenders according to me. You go to vegetable market, wholesale market, there are money lenders sitting there, and the buyers in bulk will go and take the money from them, buy the vegetables, the next day they will go and settle the account. He is not a money lender, he is a non-working partner. You know, when this buyer's house there is a marriage, this so called money lender will come and make a presentation of 10,000 rupees. There is a relationship. So we try to go assess everything by rate. No, if a fellow he advances 3,000 rupees in the evening, next morning he takes 30 rupees as his share, which means the 30 rupees is not interest, that is his share of profit. This lady has made a profit of 300 rupees and pays 30 rupees very happily. It is only when people who do not do any work, people who simply borrow money for whatever, for their distress or unemployment or some other problem, they are, when your so called payment of interest is not matched by your income, these money lenders create complications. So I would like the government to categorize money lending into two parts. Money lending through when you lend money on the security of gold or something, that you should charge only this rate of interest. They should be registered, their accounts must be open to inspection, all these things must be there. But those who lend for trade, you should not interfere with them, because they really know how much to charge and how much the other person can pay. It is all decided by the market conditions there. But we had an idea of market, we allowed market, the local markets, and the market also a discipline. So I will close my thing with the reference to what happened in Ajmer when the East India Company came. The East India Company had established a purchase center in Ajmer, and there were about 100-150 trees. In the shade the trading used to take place. They found the crowd was so much, the 150 is not sufficient, they wanted more trees to be planted. And so the British ordered, the East India Company ordered the planting, and somebody planted some 100 people trees. Then the trader said, no, we won't go near that place, we will assemble somewhere else. See what happened, why you can't assemble when there is a people tree? They said, sir, we can't tell lies in the presence of a people tree. We can't tell lies at home, we can't tell lies in temples. You know, these are not places where the market entered, that is what I say. So market cannot enter every place. That is why village panchayats, the discussions used to take place in the temple, and they will say, will you promise on Lord? No evidence. But in the court, people tell lies. The lawyer coaches the witness to tell lies. He drafts a false affidavit to the court. You know why? It is adversarial system of justice. The other fellow has to prove whether you are true or not. You need not have to tell the truth. This is the adversarial system of justice, completely contrary to our sense of justice. That is how the market also in India has a role. But in the West, the problem is they allowed market everywhere. That is why they got into this trouble. I suppose that it requires more thinking, but my experience in the last 30 years is clear that we are functioning on a model which is likely to be the global success. We must have faith in it. That is all. Thank you very much.